So what do they call you?
I go by Fabian, regular name.
Fabian, by chance, at one point in time, did you have a nickname, an alias, a moniker, or anything that you used to go by?
Yeah, I did. So my nickname for the gang I was representing at the time, I went by Shooter.
Shooter, what are you incarcerated for, sir, and how long is your sentence?
Right now, I'm incarcerated for murder. I'm in Valley State Prison, and the length of my sentence is 37 years to life.
Where are you from out here on the streets, Fabian?
Oh, I'm from Salinas, California. I grew up in the north side of Salinas, and yeah, that's where I spent most of my time. All my childhood was around that part of town.
Do you or did you at any time point in your life belong to any
Yes, I
type
can.
of gangs, groups, organizations, or anything like that inside or outside of prison, sir?
Oh, absolutely. Outside of prison, I was part of a gang called Rhonda, and that was a part of the north side of Salinas also. And I got involved with this gang around the age of 14. Yeah, so all those questions are real good questions to lead up to, and it had to do with the law being here in prison. And luckily, and of course, also unfortunately, I had the time to really reflect on a lot of my decisions and how I grew up. You know, once I first came to prison, I didn't really understand that there was something behind my decisions, my thinking process and my belief system. But I was forced to slow down and actually think about the actions that I took upon, and all the choices I made in life. So growing up in Salinas, it wasn't really easy. Like there was a lot of gangs everywhere and a lot of gang members. And my family there was a lot of gang members in my family, from my mother, my father, my sister, my cousins, my uncles, my aunts, friends and peers that I was always surrounded with. And growing up, I was abandoned by my father, my biological father, and he left my mother and I as soon as I was born. Like he made a promise that he was going to be there for us, and unfortunately, like he did not stick to that promise. So like 2 years later, that's when my stepfather came in. Um, and I didn't really know that he was my dad at the time because I was barely 2 years old and I didn't know really what was going on. For at that moment, I thought my grandpa was my father. So I spent a lot of time with him because like being with him, I felt the most safe, secure, and loved. I actually felt acknowledged and paid attention to. But it was shortly after once we moved out of my grandparents' house. At this time, we were living in the east side of Salinas by Beach Street. And once we moved to the north side of Salinas in Irish Drive, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge Court, Irish Drive. That's when the abuse started. So I began to be abused at the age of 2, and that abuse lasted for about 11 years. And it started small. It started real small. And my stepfather used to pull my hair. He used to pull my hair, and he said that he always pulled my hair because he said it was funny because I would run and start crying. And it took me a while to really register. It's like, is this really abuse? It's like it really is. This is the beginning of child abuse and how the severity of child abuse began. So it was just a stepping stone into what led up next. So yeah, at the age of 2, I started getting abused by my stepfather. I was never abused by my mother physically, but my mother was a primary my mother was a primary caregiver growing up. So she was always out the house. She was always working, providing bills, trying to find another job. So with my mother not being present at home, that's where the neglect came. And I didn't really have a supportive family. So in this household, it was me, my mother, my stepfather, and my sister. And it was not healthy because growing up in a domestic violence household, there was a lot of pain going on because my mother was a victim of abuse quite often. My sister was a victim of abuse, and I was a victim of abuse. And the abuse that I went through just continued to escalate, where he started pulling my hair or pushing me to walls, slapping me in my face, hitting me in my rear end. Towards there was moments where I would be taking a bath as a little kid, and he would just come in and just drown me. And all I can remember is just blurry lights, panicking, trying to breathe, and he'll bring me up and submerge me back down. And I'm over here panicking, not knowing like what's going on. What did I do? Am I gonna die today? And this is when I was around 8 years old. And there's a lot of instances where I see my mother being abused also. Um, one of the key moments was when I was around the age of 14. Um, I was already trickling down to gang life, being influenced by my cousins, family, because they were all gang members. So I ended up normalizing this criminal behavior, and the people I was surrounding with also were all gang members also already at that point. So it felt normal being around them, and the reason the reason I got into the gang is because of all the violence and all the trauma and all the pain and hurt that I was going through at home. So I didn't feel like this was a family. I didn't feel like we were supposed to hurt each other, that we were supposed to always be arguing, always be fighting, always being selfish. But once I started seeing gangs out from outside my window, like I liked what they had. I like the presence they had. They're always with each other. They're always backing up with. They're always helping out with one another. They were supportive. So they had this aura of security, of brotherhood. And that's what I thought. Like this is what a family was supposed to be like. So little by little, I started going around with gang members, trying to be more involved, trying to hear what they got to say. And I wasn't hurt. I wasn't abused. I wasn't neglected. So like, I started gravitating towards these gangs, and I felt like this was family, this was home. And that's where my criminality started beginning, because the main concept of them was committing crimes, violence, in order to be accepted in this gang, and I was willing to do anything in order to receive their acceptance. Going back to my mother being abused, so one day I was baking cookies for the house, and I heard a thump. So I stopped, and I was listening to what was going on. I was like, okay, it's probably nothing. And I heard another thump. So I went to my parents' bedroom, and once I opened that door, that's when I completely froze. Um, I completely froze because I saw my stepfather on top of my mother strangling her, and I froze. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. And after I clicked back in, I ran towards the edge of the bed, and I started screaming, crying to let my mother go. And he wasn't letting up. I see my mother turning really red and starting to turn purple. So I ended up grabbing, it was a fallen lamp, light blue with dolphins in it. I raised it up, and I threatened him that I was going to hit him if he didn't let my mother go. And I didn't do it because I was afraid. He ended up looking towards me quickly, and I ended up running out. I ran to my grandma's house, at my grandma's apartment, because she lived in the same apartment complex. And I told him that my stepfather was strangling my mother. She was choking her. And during this instant, this was my breaking point, because
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Because I felt like a coward at that moment. And that completely hurt me. It shattered my pride, and it made me question myself. So I felt embarrassed, belittled. I felt incapable. That affected my self-esteem and my confidence. And this was the moment where the belief system came in, where it's saying like, I will never be a victim again. I will never let someone make me feel like I'm a coward. And during this time, at the age of 14, I was committed to be a gang member completely. So being a gang member, like I had people to be around with, I had people to protect me, people that will help me out in any given situation. And I noticed once I started hanging around with these individuals, once I started being more violent, more vocal, more aggressive, um, that's when my stepfather stopped being abusive towards me and my mother and my sister. But around this time, my sister already left home because there was a lot going on at home, and she said that she was sexually assaulted. So she left home. And I was there to pretty much. I felt like I was there to bear all the pain that was going on. So it was just me and my mother and my stepfather at that time, or when I was 14 years old. Um, so during that moment, that was my breaking point where I just started being more involved in gangs and just started fighting in school, selling drugs, just getting into just fights all the time because I had a lot of unresolved trauma. And I didn't know that this was motivating my behavior at the time. But now that I had the time to reflect, I understand that all this trauma that was depressing because I didn't talk to anybody about it was coming up. You know, I was easily triggered if someone challenged me or if I thought I was challenged or I felt like a coward or, I felt insecure. I didn't really possess at that time the ability to communicate properly. But I knew how to use my anger. I knew how to fight. I knew how to protect myself. So that became my survival skill.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
That became my coping mechanism. It's phone is
Can
that
you
I
call
hang up.
back?
I'm gonna give you a call
Okay.
back. Yes, I can.
Is
Questions or anything
is
you
there
want me to clarify?
certain traumas as a gang member that you might have endured that you still carry to this very day?
Yeah, absolutely. So over here in Valley State, there's these officers do training, and they constantly firing weapons. So every time like I hear these pops, these gunshots, it makes me think back to the crime I committed, and so that's like a constant trauma I think about because Salinas is, as you said, it's a small town, but there's a lot of violence going on there. So every time I hear these constant poppings, I think of the gunshots that I committed, or I've seen or I've heard about, or being in prison also, being when I was a part of the gang lifestyle. Like every time you hear metal fall, so you're actually automatically thinking, okay, there's a weapon going on, so something's gonna happen. So constantly always looking over your shoulder became a trauma. Hearing keys over here in prison becomes a trauma because you're always hyper aware, like, okay, are they coming over here, or is this going to happen? What's going to happen? Um, so being around like former gang members, and sometimes like they glorify the lifestyle they live. That becomes trauma because it brings unwanted thoughts and feelings once again, So that's where like I decided to make the decision to separate myself, and ultimately I ended up deciding to drop out of the gang and just pursue recovery and rehabilitation.
You know what's crazy about the city of Salinas, man, is that when you look it up, bro, there are an astonishing amount of murders that happen about the place of Salinas, man. It is crazy out there. It's truly scary. It is really scary, man. What the heck is going
Yeah,
on out there?
I lost I lost friends to gang violence, of course, and also lost friends to like overdoses and drugs. Um, yeah, there's only a few friends that I lost because of gang violence. Some of them, of course, got killed by rival gang members. Some of them overdosed on drugs. Some of them even committed suicide because of whatever they were going through at the time. So it is astonishing that it's not that big of a city, but there is a lot of murders, and there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of gang members, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people like just gravitate towards that, and just it's upsetting, and I do hope like somehow, some way, like they get some awareness, and that's why I decided really to take this approach to do this interview because to give people more awareness, because I do believe in the cause that you're pursuing, and I do want people to understand that the criminal gang lifestyle is not not the way to live, And there is a lot behind our actions that we take that we have to act upon that need to be looked into, that need to be addressed.
Some people kill based off emotion. Some people turn into killers. You might lose a brother, and that might turn someone who's never killed before into a killer. Some people are shown violence. They go on a drive-by. They're just a driver, and they become accustomed to it. It becomes easier. How was it in your situation, man? How were
Yeah.
you introduced to this violence?
So the violence started at home, of course. So being a victim of abuse, seeing my mother being abused, seeing my sister being abused, this is where I learned that violence was a cure-all, because once my father was upset, he had a disagreement, he would use violence in order to resolve conflict, whether that's through intimidation, punching holes on the walls, throwing things around,
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
or being physically violent towards us. And this led to, with my peers, fighting was a cure-all to resolve conflict. This led to school where I seen people fight to resolve conflict. So constantly when I was with all these situations, experiences I was going through, this negative belief system started to emerge, where I thought violence is necessary. Violence will resolve my conflicts. Violence will keep me safe. Violence will give me what I want. So that ranged from using emotional violence, psychological violence, or even physical violence. And from fights led to weapons, and weapons led to knives, and knives led to guns, and ultimately that's where murder came in. And like for me, I'm here for murder because I'm responsible for murdering Mario Puga. And ultimately, why did I do it? I had to think about that a lot. And now that I'm more aware of trauma and the way I grew up and the people I was surrounded with, that's because I was willing to do anything for the people that I thought was my family. So that willingness and my own unaddressed traumas and wanting to fit in, wanting to have my family, not wanting to be abandoned anymore, and even normalizing violence and criminal activity and being a gang member, breaking the laws, I was willing to do anything to maintain the acceptance that I had with the gang, because that was my family. I did not want to be abandoned once again, because I was abandoned by my father, abandoned by my stepfather, abandoned by my grandfather. And I faced a lot of abandonment, neglect, and betrayal growing up. So I didn't want to experience that again, because I already didn't feel good about myself. I already had the low self-confidence and the low self-esteem. So I told myself, I was willing to do anything to maintain my family. And that decision drove to the murder of an innocent man.
Would you be able to explain that situation, brother? Take us there, man, leading up to it. How did you put yourself in this position, and what was it that happened, sir?
So during the time, it was May 8th, 2016, I was at home with another gang member, and we were just having a barbecue. And before that, I got a SK on my chest, which meant scrap killer. And I was told by the gang that I had to put in work, pretty much saying that I had to go commit crimes in order to earn the tattoos or earn the respect, and to put a spotlight on the neighborhood, so people could understand and respect who we are and the person that I am. And that's where the name Shooter came in. So I was told to go out to go kill someone. So that's when I went out to go find someone to kill. And I was going around Salinas throughout the day looking for another rival, another enemy. And during this process, I was like, okay, I need to do something. So because I didn't want to lose my family, I wanted them to be proud of me, wanted to be accepted, because I recall every time that I was willing to do something crazy, with
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
whether that was fighting, committing crimes, stealing, um, hard theft, selling drugs, selling guns. Always got that praise, and I never experienced the abuse, the neglect, and abandonment, and the betrayal as I experienced growing up. So I'm going around Salinas with the conscious thought that I need to kill someone. And it got to the point like I wanted to kill someone because I wanted that praise, I wanted to feel accepted, and I didn't want to be abandoned because if I was abandoned, I would feel lonely. I would feel lonely. I would feel unloved, unworthy, and I would be questioning myself once again that I was a coward, that I didn't want to do anything to maintain my family, that I want to protect my family. So during the daytime, I didn't find anybody to kill, to represent the neighborhood, to fill my own needs, because that's what was going on at that moment. I wanted to fill my own needs because I wanted to be accepted. So all that was rooted in selfishness and trauma, and I didn't think long term that I could really go to prison for the rest of my life for this, because at that time it didn't matter. I didn't have the consequential thinking at the time because I didn't think forward. I was thinking at the moment. So during the nighttime, that's when I ended up finding a house that the gangs always said it was a green lighted house, pretty much meaning that if you ever see a male figure out there, he's a gang member, no questions asked. You don't have to ask him where he's from or anything about that. That house is known to have gang members, and that's when I saw initially I saw 3 men out there, and parked the car, ran up to the driveway, and that's when I started firing shots. That's when I killed Mario Puga, and I chased his brother-in-law Jose. I did not. I was able to shoot him at the time. I wasn't able to shoot him because he was running, and because I didn't want to accept the consequences about the actions that I took, and because at that time, as I reflect on now, it was cowardice because I didn't want to accept the responsibility and accountability what was going on, what I did. So I ran out, I ran away, I left Mario there, remorselessly. I left him there to die in his driveway with his family at his house, with his father-in-law just feet away from him. And I drove off, went away, and the next day later, that's when I got pulled over by a Salinas PD. And
Immediately after this incident took place, you drive off. Where did you go? Where did you go? And what was your thought process like, man? What was going on in your head? How were you able to sleep that night? Did you sleep that night?
yeah, so after I committed murder, I went home. I went home and I started stashing the guns, the clothing, everything I had away. I was panicking at the time, and I was scared. I didn't know. I didn't know what to expect, and I was numb. I was numb also. All I was really concerned about, like my thought process, was like, what are the homies going to say? What are they going to think about me? Did I do everything right? Um, I was just selfishly focusing on myself and not on human life. Um, I was selfishly focusing on myself and not on human life, and that's daunting because like I never see myself getting to the point of being willing to commit murder. I did sleep that night, and I don't really even recall having dreams or anything. It was just wanting to see what was the result, wanting to see like will I still be accepted for what I did, from the gang. And of course I was, I was accepted and I was commended about what I did, and the pats on the back were there, and then and at that moment, I felt at peace. I was grateful about what I did. I was prideful for what.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
At that time, what I did not haunt me because I was already callous to that point. I already had a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. I already had this superior complex that I'm a gamer and I'm going to do what I have to do in order to maintain my family. This phone's
Okay,
about to hang
okay.
up. I'll give you a call back. Okay, thank you. So yeah, so after I committed murder, I was home by myself. Um, yeah, I was just focused on myself and not concerning about what I did and who I did it to. Um, all I was focused on was the gang's approval, the gang's acceptance. Um, and as I reflect on my coward's actions, my relentless, just remorseless actions, I think about it and I feel like I was already numb to the point where I was able to do that because I've been through a lot of the traumas, being abused, seeing the violence, being around the gang members, seeing how willingly and coldly and callously they were able to commit violence with no hesitation, with no remorse. And I began to mirror that. And I began to numb myself because of all the pain I was going through. And at that time, I didn't know this was a motivational factor that was going on. And I just wanted to be just like them. So I am responsible for the murder of Mario Puga. And what I did was not right. Absolutely not. It was completely selfish. It was narrow thinking. It was remorseless, callous. Those were the actions of a monster. And I do regret what I did because he did not deserve that. His family did not deserve that. Community did not deserve that at all. And I am remorseful for what I did because Mario died at the age of 21. I shortened his life by decades. He left behind family. I deprived him of a longer life with his family, with his children, with his wife, with his coworkers, with his friends. There's a lot of memories I deprived him of because of my own selfishness, because of my own unresolved trauma, because of my own anger and resentment that I held towards my family, even towards myself, because of my own lack of self-worth. So I projected everything I was feeling towards anybody and everybody that got in my way. And unfortunately, this was Mario and his family that I inflicted such harm on, and such trauma that they're going to have to live with because of my own selfishness. Now they're going to have to live with that throughout their life, each and every year now, each and every day. Yeah. So the way they knew it was me is because there was surveillance videos in another house. So it didn't take them long to figure out like the vehicle. The vehicle had like a missing caps or something in the rear of your mirror that was hanging, or like there was damaged paint. And from that moment, they just started looking for that vehicle the next day. So where I was at that time, I was at the DMV taking the driver test to get my license. And once I was driving back home, I seen a police car, and it made a complete stop. So I thought immediately, well, that's going to be for me, you know. I didn't connect it towards the murder. I just connected it towards like being discriminated in Salinas views because of being young, being Mexican, or looking like a gang member. So I immediately thought, okay, I'm about to be pulled over right now. I didn't connect it towards that, towards the murder. That's how selfish I was at the time. That's how callous and numb I was at the time. That I didn't even consider that what the murder that I committed was anything wrong. The murder that I committed was
You thought you had
just
completely
another
got
day.
away with it.
So I was just absolutely. I had like a God complex. Like, okay, I could do anything. I could get away with anything. So I just thought, okay, it's gonna be another traffic stop. I'll be harassed, then I'll be able to go. But my mother was on my right side because she had to be there because she had a license. And at that time, that's when sirens came on. The police came out with the guns, and there were multiple police cars, and responders came, and we had to come out with our hands up, guns drawn. And from there, I got booked in county jail. I was there the whole time. My mother was released, of course, because she had nothing to do with it. But I created a victim of my mother also because she had to go through that experience where she had to have her hands raised up.
Oh
Um,
man.
she had to kneel down. She had to be cuffed up. And what frightened me at that moment, because my mother, her pants were falling. She had to lift up her pants. She lifted up her pants, and immediately, like, I tensed up because I thought they were going to shoot my mother. And how would I have felt like if I just murdered a man, and then if my mother would have got shot or killed that day too, I would have murdered my mother because of my own selfishness, because of my own, uh, problems. I did not know what were going on at the time. But luckily, she didn't get shot. Luckily, she was left harmless.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
But mentally, like, I damaged her for life, so I created a victim in my mother also. And so being booked in county jail, I went to trial. The reason I went to trial was for another selfish reason, because I did not want to be accountable for committing murder. I didn't feel like it was a big deal. I felt like, well, he was a gang member, I was a gang member, we both signed the same contract, so he knew what to expect. So I was in denial, thinking that I didn't do nothing wrong, that it wasn't my fault, that we were living the same lifestyle. But through this court process, I found out that Mario wasn't a gang member. Even if he was a gang member, that does not make it okay for what I did, for the murder that I committed. So I went through this court process because I didn't want to be accountable. I didn't want to be responsible. So I created more victims. And victims in Mario, victims in his family, victims in the community, victims in the jury, and everybody in the court process, because I made them relive May 8th, 2016, again and again and again. And repeatedly, they had to show Mario's lifeless body, and his family had to identify it. And there was a point where his father-in-law, they told him, "Do you know who this is?" And his voice cracked. He said, "This is Mario. That's Mario." And during this crime, Javier, his name's Javier, he was present at the time of the murder, but I did not see him because he backed into a corner. So the only people that I saw was Mario and Jose. Jose was the man that attempted the murder also. So Javier, he testified that he saw me. He couldn't see my face, but he saw me murder Mario in front of him. I was feet away. He said if I would have looked up, he would have saw me, and I felt like I would have died too. So the testimonies that were going on from all his family, like, I felt a profound amount of guilt that I just wanted to say, okay, I did it, I plead guilty. But at the same time, I was like, no, like, I'm going to get away with murder, I'm going to get away with murder, and I'm going to do whatever I got to do. It doesn't even matter. And the reason I really took it to trial not only was because I didn't want to be held accountable for my actions, not only because I wanted to get away with murder, but as a basis I was going through it because I was told that one of the witnesses said that the shooter had a tattoo on his face, and me, I don't have no tattoos.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I didn't have any tattoos on my face, so I used this evidence to my selfish benefit, saying, okay, look, the shooter had a tattoo on his face, that means it wasn't me, so I'm gonna get away with murder. But I was blind to the fact that, well, they had the video. Even though you couldn't see me, they had a video, they had the guns, they had the clothing with the gun residue on my clothing. They had pretty much anything and everything to convict me of murder. but I was still in denial. Like, no, I'm gonna get away with this, you know. Like, I'm gonna get away with it, and I'm gonna just continue to live my life. It doesn't matter. And I got found guilty. I got found guilty, and I was sentenced to 120 years to life in prison at the age of 19. Um, yeah, the victim's impact statement. I don't recall them reading anything. I don't recall them saying anything when I was sentenced. But going through the testimonies that they had, um, talking about who was Mario and the relationship they had with him, and having to identify his body, and talking about what they were going through that day. Like, it was painful. I had feelings of sorrow, you know, of regret at that time. But the selfishness and the callousness was still rooted. It was still the main core, because I still did not want to be responsible for what I did. And I continued to run away from it. I was continuing in denial. Today, I do regret what I did, because no person deserves to die. No person deserves to be murdered, you know, and all life is sacred, you know. And now that I have a higher power, I know that I committed something really wrong, you know. And I hurt his family, and now, like, they can't create memories with him no more, you know. There's always going to be an empty seat at the kitchen table. His children are going to grow up without the father. His wife is now a widow. His family just don't have Mario any longer. And I traumatized the school right next by, because they were just yards away. So they had to live with that. They moved out of their house. Jose moved out of the country. So I created endless victims, you know, not only from Mario's family, but also the witnesses, the police officers, the paramedics, the first responders, all the way to people that heard about the crime, friends, family, co-workers, colleagues, people that saw the news, people that are already fearful about what was going on in Salinas, and I just contributed to their fear, contributed to their lost sense of security, you know. And now I'm here taking responsibility and accountability for the cowardice actions that I committed, the selfish actions that I committed.
While inside the county jail, were there others like you? Were there other young men who just threw their entire lives away due to this gangster culture, this gangster belief system?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of people that were young. I was the youngest in the county jail at that time, in the area I was located in. But there were younger individuals from 18, 19, 20. There was even older ones that are still coming back in and out of jail. But there's been a lot of people that were throwing away their lives for murder or attempted murder or robberies. You know, getting sentenced to like unlivable numbers. You know, like if they're already 20 or 19, like, and they're getting sentenced to 120 years to life, 100 years or 80 years, like, it's not likely they're going to live up to that, you know. And it was sad that a lot of the youth were being misled and misguided, even brainwashed to the point where, like, they're doing meaningless deeds for a gang, but underneath the surface is like a lot of these children, a lot of these kids, a lot of the youth.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
A lot of them are going through a lot of trauma, a lot of pain that they did not know how to address or had the confidence to talk about it to someone, you know, because growing up in a Mexican household, we don't talk about our emotions or feelings, you know. We can't do that because it's not masculine, you know, it's not what men do. This phone is about to hang up. I'll give you a call, another call right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so coming to prison, I was scared, you know, I didn't know what to completely expect. All I really knew was what the TV shows or the movies say about prison, or word of mouth from the the people, some of the gang members that were in prison. So I was coming into prison, Delano, reception center at the age of 19, and I walked in, and there's just people out in the day room, people out in the day room just doing what they're doing. I didn't really feel like an immediate threat or anything because at that time I dropped out. I was already a SNY. Um, so I was still nervous. I had a roommate he was from Southern California. He was an ex gang member, ex Southerner from Avenues, and he was probably like 50, 60 years old, and it was ironic because he was a Southerner and I'm already an ex Northerner. So it was like now I had to put aside the differences, because like I don't want to be. I just dropped out of being a gang member, and now I had to live with someone that I thought was my enemy at the time. So it was like it was uncomfortable, of course, and being in prison in Delano was mostly like solitary because we only had like 1 hour of program if that. So it was uncomfortable, and I got in conflicts. Fortunately, it wasn't nothing physical. It was because I had the SK on my chest, and a lot of people still had the core belief that being a gang member, even though we were already on SNY, being in a dropout yard, right? A lot of people still had the gang mentality, the criminal mentality, and always came into problems because I had this SK on my chest. They always telling me put on my shirt, and
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
at that time I wasn't concerned about what they wanted or anything. I was still stubborn. I was still ruthless. I still didn't have remorse or empathy. So I was willing to, get into fights because here comes my core belief: like violence is necessary, and violence will resolve my conflicts, and violence will keep me safe, and people will know like not to mess with me because you could use this violence. But luckily it never got to that point. For the most part, I was left alone. But being in a reception, I was there for I think 2 months. And around this time, there's this program called the Youth Offender Program. And because of this program, I wasn't sent to a level 4. I was sent to a level 3, and I went to SADF Corcoran. So when I was there, I felt like my higher power was with me this whole time through this whole prison journey because I didn't experience a lot of the profound amount of trauma a lot of people went through going to level 4s and 3s, going to really severe chaotic prisons, because my experience in SADF wasn't too bad because there wasn't much fighting, there wasn't much stabbing, there wasn't killing, there wasn't much of any of that. So a lot of people said it is a soft yard, because when they use that term soft yard, they're saying there's nothing going on here and people don't fight, don't steal drugs, don't do a lot of criminal activity, which other high places do. And I heard a lot of the stories of the places where people are getting killed. A lot of people are selling drugs. A lot of people are getting abused by the COs or getting fights with the COs. So those are like, to me, a high level of trauma facilities. But in SADF, because I was a youth offender and I fell along the youth offender laws, I was overridden to a level 3, and I spent 4 years over there in a level 3 yard in SADF, and I was grateful for that because it helped me stay out of a lot of trouble. It helped me stay out of a lot of trouble. I was immediately put into programs, self-help groups to understand myself, to rehabilitate and get into recovery. And at that time, I wasn't still clicking in. I still didn't have empathy. I still didn't have remorse. I didn't have full regret. But when I came to prison, I was like, I don't like being here, and I don't want to be here. So how do I get out? Well, before I committed murder, I committed attempted armed robbery in Monterey. And I did 2 years in the CYA, which is like a prison for the youth. So I was there when I was 15, and I got out when I was 17. 6 months later, I committed murder because I went back to what I knew. I went back to the gangs. I went back to the neighborhood. I went back to being selfish, callous, and being a monster. because that's what I knew, and I didn't do any lasting change or any self-reflection or introspection. But being in prison this time at the age of 19, I had the same mindset. Okay, I'm gonna do everything I got to do to get out of here because I don't want to be here no more. Well, I don't want to be here because I don't want to spend my life with these people. But getting to these groups, these self-help groups, I started listening a little bit. I started listening little by little, and the roommates that I had, or the people that gave the testimony, like they were young too, here with life sentences, most of them lifers, or and the facilitators and mentors that were there giving their story, like they spent years in level fours experiencing drug addiction, criminal activity, murders, attempted murders, a lot of fights, a lot of solitary. And I was like, that's where like the change started, the wheel started rolling. It was like, man, I don't want to be like that, like I don't want to be here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in prison. I don't want to continue this cycle of insanity. I don't want to continue being immature, childish, or being viewed as a kid or a degenerate. And so I started working on it. My change started selfishly because I wanted to get out. Then it started trickling down to remorse, started trickling down to regret, to empathy. And that's when I started developing the insight. Then looking into my childhood of how I grew up, I didn't like the fact that what I deemed normal was not normal, that I was being abused, that I was being neglected, rejected, and abandoned. I didn't like the feeling about that. And I thought, like I was resistant to it. Like, no, like my family loved me, They cared for me, they provided what I needed. But that's what I thought at the time. But once I unveiled it, I was like, my mother wasn't really home, My stepfather was abusive. My sister left home. I was there by myself being abused all the time. I was around gang members all the time. I was fighting all the time, I'm stealing all the time to get my own food, to get my own clothes. And I was like, man, this is not normal, But hearing the story of these older timers, right, the people that've been here for decades, and some of them were just still in the cycle of insanity, still with unaddressed trauma, still living in addiction, still living in criminality, still doing the same thing over and over and over. So it was like, that gave me an awakening, like, man, I don't want to be like this, And having the insight and developing understanding and unveiling the truth from how I grew up, it's been taking time because I've been on this journey for 6 years now, participating in these groups, participating in growth and rehabilitation and recovery, and understanding why I made the choices, why I grew up, what was my thoughts, what were my feelings at the time, what was my belief system at the time, why did I do the things that I did, And it trickled down all the way to my childhood, and that's where I began mirroring behaviors. Well, that's where I began to learn behaviors. That's where I began to develop the core beliefs. And now, with the awareness that I have because of all these groups, I took that approach to start changing these core beliefs, the system that I relied on, So I started challenging the status quo of things, and little by little, I started understanding myself, understanding my behavior, understanding my responses, understanding my character defects. I was constantly angry. I constantly did not talk. I suppressed everything that I was going through. I didn't have an outlet to talk to. I didn't trust anybody. I had this superior complex that I thought I was better than everybody because I felt invincible. I always had envy, and I was always resentful. I held a lot of resentment, but now I had to let all this go. I had to challenge my core belief systems, thinking that criminal behavior was necessary and it was okay, violence was necessary and it was okay, which is not. Having authority issues, how to address this. There's a lot of issues that I needed addressed, and luckily, like, I took the approach to really understand what was going on with myself. I had to really listen to myself and really think and embrace the pain that I was going through. It was uncomfortable, and the journey of recovery and rehabilitation has been bittersweet because it hurt knowing that I didn't have a healthy family, a healthy household. And I've been through a lot of pain, a lot of unaddressed issues at that time. But today I seen that it was sweet because now I feel a lot better. I feel more grounded. I feel sane. Um, no longer I've been going without violence for years now. No write-ups. Pursuing college, being in groups, facilitating groups, being a mentor to the youth here. So I'm giving back to the community, to this community, and I hope that the change I'm able to implement here to carry out there. So being partaking in this interview brings a spotlight to the criminal lifestyle, the gang lifestyle, and this is a token of my amends to Mario, his family, Jose, Javier, and to the city of Salinas, and to anybody and everybody that's hearing this. It's like this is like a form of amends, saying that what I did was wrong, and I am accountable for my actions. So I am here today, paying the price for my cowardly actions. Um, even in today, I'm still continuing to help out these younger individuals, being a mentor and holding myself to higher standards, because I know better today. And I'm not going to continue this cycle of insanity, nor do I want these younger individuals to not know what was going on within themselves or knowing what's going on in their household and just wanting the best for them so they could change their life so they won't have to be in the situation that I am in.
Do you have any advice, any last advice for any other youngster out there, anybody out there coming out from the way from Salinas or any other neighborhood for that matter, who's aspiring to make a name for themselves, who's carrying a pistol, who's on the verge of making a life altering decision, sir? If you can speak to them, what would you say to them?
What I would say is that the gang lifestyle is not worth it. The criminal lifestyle is not worth it. Um, that road does not lead to anything but imprisonment or death. For my cousin, it led to death. To me, it led to imprisonment, and it just breaks families. There's a lot of key issues that we go through that is unaddressed or that is not spoken about. So me, what I find helpful and what I will say to the youth, even the youth in here, is just look for help. Talk about what you're going through and try to find healthy outlets and healthy coping skills to help you go through and manage what you're going through. Because
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
The trauma, the abuse, and the neglect, and all the hurt that people are going through should not be suppressed. Because we think we could hold on, we think we could handle it, but in actuality we can't. That's where we begin to blow up. That's where we begin to fight or be violent, or
you have 60 seconds remaining,
or hurt ourselves or hurt others. So my advice is look for help. Understand, know the people that you're surrounding with. If you're going through troubles at home, look for help in school and friends and role models. And if you're involved with gangs, get away from it as soon as possible because that is not the life to live. I'll give you a call back
Okay.
because this phone's about to hang up.